Hi everyone. Here we are for lecture number 8. Our topic today is going to be the societal reaction to World War I, and it's going to change almost all aspects of people's lives once again. So we're going to look at life in the 1920s and how it's different in Europe versus America, substantially different. Okay, like in the other videos, what I want you to do is basically uh, I'm going to mention the terms just like I usually put face to face on the blackboard. This time I want you to pick, just like before, two terms. Write for each one a one paragraph examination of the term in relation to the overall theme of the lecture. So you'll want to do that for two terms. Then I also want you to do a one paragraph response to something that your classmate has put in the discussion post. Okay, the terms we're going to be discussing. Okay, the first one is going to be J.M. Keynes. That's spelled Keynes. Another term is going to be totalitarianism. Totalitarianism. So totalitarianism. Next term, lost generation. Next term, new, capital N, new, capital M, morality. Our next term is going to be jazz age. Next term is going to be Great Depression / Great Slump, SLUMP. Our next term is going to be President Herbert Hoover. Next term, Hoovervilles, HOOVERVILLES. And next term is going to be Hoover flags. Okay, so basically, all right, so the war is over on November 2nd, 1918, and then suddenly after the holidays in early 1919, we're going to see the meeting of both the winners and the losers of the war at what's called the Treaty of Versailles. Okay, so they meet in Versailles, France in January of 1919, and there at the Treaty of Versailles, what's going to be determined is both the penalties and the blame for the war. Now, who gets to make this decision? Is it going to be the losers or the winners? Well, of course, it's going to be the winners. The losers are forced to capitulate. Okay, now what we're going to see right after World War I is there's going to be really a lot happening. One thing we're going to see is going to be the very rapid rise of our next term, totalitarianism. What totalitarianism means, it means total control by the government. And it leads into the very extreme political philosophical movements of fascism, Nazism, and Stalinism. So communism under Stalin in Russia. Now, these are very extreme political philosophies. We had nothing at all like it before. Now, what makes them so extreme? What makes totalitarianism so extreme? Well, as suggested in the name is the idea that it's a total control by the government. There's always a balancing act between the rights of the individual versus the rights of the government. Which are we usually more interested in? What can we do to serve our society, or what can we get by being a member of society? So it's always sort of a balancing act. Probably most of us are more interested, what are we getting by being a member of society, not what can we do for the society. All right, well, with a totalitarian regime, the rights of the individual become negligible. They become insignificant. All that matters is the idea of what benefits the society. If people have to be hurt, if people have to sacrifice, if people even have to be removed from society or killed, that is going to be seen as insignificant next to the importance of what benefits the society. So that's what really makes it so extreme. It's based on the idea that the ends justify the means. So as long as you get the result that you want in the end, it doesn't matter what way you get to it. All right. What do we see after World War I? Well, they're going to meet in Versailles, France, and there in Versailles, France, they're going to have to hammer out who's to be blamed for causing the war, and then what the war reparations are going to be. Now, the winners of the war are obviously going to be America, England, and France. Remember, Russia backed out. The losers are going to be Germany, Austria-Hungary, and Italy. Now, the country that's going to be blamed by far for the war, the most by far, is going to be Germany, with Italy kind of in second place and not that much mention of Austria-Hungary. Okay, but in Germany, the Germans are going to admit they did a bunch of horrible things during the war. Now, some of those horrible things are detailed there in the book All Quiet on the Western Front. And the Germans are not going to, pretend that they didn't do horrible things, but they're going to say, so did everybody else, which was very true. So, they're going to make the argument, why are we the ones being blamed almost entirely for the whole thing? We did horrible things, but so did everyone else. No one listens to them, basically because they're the ones that lost, and a lot of their blame is going to be caused by the fact that they were so willing to support their ally Austria-Hungary to really start the whole thing going. Now, here is the penalty placed upon Germany. Okay, Germany's going to first of all have to give up a third of their lucrative mining interests. So they lose a third of their mines. They're also going to have to give back the territories of Alsace and Lorraine. Alsace-Lorraine. They have to give that back. It was given to France. It was originally France's. It became German. Now it's going to go back to France after World War I. So, imagine what it's like if you're a person there. It would be like, you're in southern Canada, and then let's say the United States took it over. So for a while you were saying aboot, then you say about, and then it's aboot again. So which is it? It becomes a little hard to follow sometimes. Okay, but anyway, so they have to give back Alsace-Lorraine. They give up the mining interests. The Germans are also, as determined there at the Treaty of Versailles, they are not going to be allowed to have an army. Basically, people felt that if you give the Germans even a cap gun, they're going to build a militia. So how do you stop that? Make sure they don't even have an army to defend themselves. Instead, there's going to be an allied army in Germany that's going to be their military. Okay, so pretty heavy penalties already. And of course, the psychological horror of losing the war and then being blamed for causing the whole thing. But this is nothing compared to the financial penalties. Now, here at the Treaty of Versailles is what the financial penalties are going to be. All right. Now, remember, this is over 100 years ago. So these numbers aren't going to sound like that much today. But remember, they're going to mean a whole lot more 100 years ago. Okay. So here's what the war cost all the countries combined. So all the way from 1914 to 1918, all the countries combined, they paid $3.3 billion, and also a loss of life of 10 million. All right, here's what the penalty is going to be that people expect Germany to pay back. $33 billion, 10 times what it cost all the countries combined over the whole course of the war. Now, does that sound like a sensible amount to ask them to pay or a ridiculous amount? Well, the chief economist at the Treaty of Versailles, an Englishman by the name of John Maynard Keynes. So that's our next term, J.M. Keynes, Keynes. Keynes had no love of the Germans. He had saw all the things they had done to Britain. So, he certainly didn't particularly like the Germans. But he says this is a dangerous thing to do. You're boxing the Germans in. You're giving them no chance to get ahead. And people that have no chance to get ahead, who have no chance to redeem themselves, are going to resort to dangerous things because they have nothing left to lose. And think about it. Who are the most dangerous people there are going to be people who have nothing to lose. Would we be more scared at the gates of the campus to have a bunch of lawyers coming on the campus from Doylestown with their fountain pens, or a bunch of homeless people coming in from Center City on the train? Well, I think most of us would probably say the latter, because what makes the homeless people so dangerous? They have nothing to lose. The lawyers, there's a lot that can be attached from them, so they're not going to be as dangerous. Okay, so they're boxing the Germans in, and Keynes says that's the wrong thing to do. So J.M. Keynes is the chief economist at the Treaty of Versailles. Keynes is also going to be a famous, he's going to come up with what's called Keynesian economics. Keynesian economics is the idea of deficit spending. It's the idea that governments basically borrow money to create jobs. So they pay people to do things, and this kickstarts the economy. People have money, they spend money, this gives other people jobs, these people are paying taxes, and the whole thing keeps going. It's going to be a popular policy used by President FDR, Franklin Delano Roosevelt. It's also going to be a policy used by, much more recently, Barack Obama. So it's a way of kickstarting the economy when it's really beginning to flounder or really in horrific shape. In itself, it's not necessarily a bad idea. The danger is if you're constantly doing it and not worrying about paying the money back. Okay, Keynes is famous for saying a few things. Okay, one thing that he said was, if someone owed the bank $100, the bank's in trouble. If someone owed the bank $1 million, then if someone owes the bank $100, the person's in trouble. If someone owed the bank $1 million, the bank's in trouble. Well, what did he mean by that? He meant that if it's $100, the person's going to have to sacrifice and work harder to pay it back, because that's the amount they can pay back with sacrifice. If you owe $1 million, there's no way you can ever come up with that amount. So the bank was stupid to lend you that much, and they're going to have to end up writing it off. Okay, well, anyway, so that's Keynes. So he says, don't do this. It's a dangerous thing. Unfortunately, they're going to ignore Keynes. And the Germans, of course, as we're going to see, become desperate, because as we talked about before, World War I, some of the causes of World War II, rather, are a continuation of some of the problems of World War I. All right, so our next term is going to be lost generation. Okay, who are the lost generation? The lost generation were young people who lost their youth and they lost their innocence to the war. Now, for most people, their happiest time in life is their college years, their coming of age years, when you're ending high school, starting college, starting young adulthood. Now, what makes that such a wonderful time in life? It's carefree. You haven't done that much yet, so you're experiencing new things for the first time. You're not jaded and cynical and bored. You're healthy. Life's new and fresh, and you're willing to take some chances. Okay, now there's always been generational conflict between the generation of the parents and the generation of their children. each generation of children, as they come of age, want to make their mark in the world. The people of your day are frequently using that in the term, they're calling people of my age or a little older than me, okay, boomer. So, what's that saying? It's different generations. And, people of my age saying things about people of your age, the millennials. Or I guess you're actually the premillennials. Okay, so generational conflict, always, a popular theme. I'm sure you experienced this when you went home for, back in the fall for a Thanksgiving break. Things that are perfectly normal and acceptable on college campuses are not going to fly when you go back home, because your parents are still seeing you as their children. You're not a completely free individual like you are on the campus. And notice, people are not calling you adults. They're giving you kind of a modifier to that. So what kind of adults do they call people in their early 20s? They're calling them young adults. What does that mean? Basically, adults with training wheels on. Okay, so there's always this generational conflict, but it becomes much more extreme after World War I. So the young people who gave up their youth and innocence to the war, they're going to be referred to as the lost generation, and they're going to despise their parents and the values of their parents with every bone in their body. So it's not just a dislike or feeling their parents' views are outdated. It's rather the view that they hate everything about their parents' stance on everything. Now, why? Okay, well, they basically felt their parents dragged them into a war that never had to have been fought. There's a saying associated with the Vietnam War which could just as well apply to this war. The saying goes, "Young men die for old men's pride." Well, what does that really mean? Who are the ones who make the decisions? They're going to be the older people who don't have to go and enact the decisions, who have to make the sacrifice. So the geezers make the decisions. The young people have to carry out the decisions of their parents' generation. So there's going to be a lot of resentment because of that during the 1920s. Okay, so the young people are going to develop their next term, what's called capital N new, capital M morality. Okay, this new morality is the idea that the young people are coming up with their new values that are entirely different than the values of their parents' generation. All right, so let's look what makes the new morality so new. Well, one thing is their parents really define themselves by the jobs they had. The first thing that you would be judged on would be what kind of job you had, how good you were at the job, were you moving up in your career, how much money did you make? Were you a good family member? How large a family did you have? How stable were you? So these were the kind of things that their parents really stressed. The young people, they felt they gave up a lot already for the war, so they're not going to care very much about their jobs. They're going to basically become somewhat slackers and look for the easiest jobs they can find. They almost become like adolescents. If adolescents work, think of how poorly they do their work. I mean, if let's say you promised your boss that you're going to work for Wendy's all summer long, but you made your financial goals by early August and all your friends are going down the shore, are you going to say, "Oh, no, I can't go. I promised my boss I'd work at Wendy's"? No, you collect your paycheck, not even tell the guy you're not coming back, and go with your friends down the shore. Now, would an older person do that, someone like a middle manager? No. So work for the lost generation was a minor part of their identity. They just didn't care about it. They're instead going to be identifying themselves by their hobbies. It's kind of like you guys, you go to a college party, are you going to constantly be talking about and asking people about their jobs? Doubtful, because jobs don't mean anything. They're just basically money makers, a way to pay for, the things you need to survive. What's the difference if you wait tables, stack books in the library, or are a paper boy? Well, a little bit of difference in the amount that you earn, but you're not going to be any of these for professionally. It's just a means to an end. So you don't talk about that very much. Instead, how are you going to identify yourself? You're identifying yourself by your hobbies. I like this. I like this kind of music. Um, these are my hobbies. These are the things I find fun. These are how I see myself. Or your major. Why do you define yourself so much by your major? Because your major tells people a lot about you. Certain majors are certainly more compatible with others. If one's all about, making money, and the other one's all about serving the world, and you don't care about how much you're paid at all, the two are not going to coexist very well. So these tell a lot about people's identity. Okay, so the lost generation care about their hobbies, not about their work. Now, you're also going to find sexual attitudes begin to change. For their parents' generation, the sexual attitudes were very traditional. You marry someone of the opposite sex, you stay married for the rest of your life. It doesn't matter if you're bored with them, if you're not compatible anymore, if you made a mistake, if your needs change. None of these things matter or are at all relevant. Why? All that matters is what you said you're going to do. You made this commitment before God and man, and you stay with this person till one of you dies. Well, the lost generation said they don't want to get married, so they're going to start living together rather than getting married. They're going to sleep together, and so a lot of premarital sex, a lot of illegitimate children produced. Well, for their parents' generation, oh my God, a child out of wedlock, we better hide the girl up in the mountains somewhere in a convent so nobody could see our quote shame. Now it's like, oh well, these things happen, what can you do? Divorce becomes rampant. So fewer people getting married as part of the new morality, and also divorce. Homosexuality became a lot more accepted as well. Before the war, people barely knew what homosexuality was. The term homosexual did not enter the English language until 1870. Does that mean there were no gay people before 1870? No, of course not. It just wasn't seen as anything unique and different or definable. Now, after the war, people are, staying with whomever they want. For example, the person who coined the term lost generation, the American novelist Gertrude Stein, she basically lived an open lesbian marriage with her lover, Alice B. Toklas. She didn't hide it. She wasn't discreet. No one cared. So, sexual attitudes changed. Music is going to be a very big part of the new morality, and music's going to be associated with jazz. So the 1920s is often called the Jazz Age. Okay, now what is distinct about jazz? What made it different than the music listened to by their parents? Okay, well, think of the difference between classical music and jazz music. What are some of the differences? Now, if I said I saw two groups of people in Center City, one was going to a jazz club and one was going to the Kimmel Center or the Academy of Music, would you have any trouble discerning which group was going where? No, of course not. What are some of the differences? Well, the audience going to the classical concerts are more formally dressed and a great deal older than those going to jazz concerts. I go to mostly classical, and I'm usually one of the younger people there. Now, who says it's a dying art form? Okay, now with, when we think of classical music, where's the venue? It's going to be a formal setting like the Academy of Music or the Kimmel Center. For jazz, where is that taking place? Underground clubs. Jazz concerts are also much later. So look at the atmosphere we have here. We have young people casually dressed. They're in backs of bars, so they're drinking. It's late at night, first set starting 10 o'clock, next one, midnight, then ideally, third set 1:30. You're drinking between the sets. So how likely is it that you're going to make it to work the next day? Not real likely. But why do you can get away with lying to your boss a couple times of how you couldn't make it to work, but a couple times after that he's not going to believe it and you get fired. Why are you not going to care? Because the jazz meant more to you, and this job didn't mean anything to you. It'd be like, who cares if you work in Wendy's or Burger King? They're both the same lousy kind of job. Okay, so jazz becomes everything. And then look at the structure of jazz. Okay, jazz is America's first form of music, distinctly American form of music. Who's it performed by? Kind of the down and outs. It started in the American South and particularly heavy among African Americans. Okay, so what about classical? Classical is a European form of expression, jazz is very improvisational. The same song can be performed 100 different ways depending on how the performers feel at that moment. Classical, no. Classical is very highly structured. Which instruments come in at what order, which ones dominate, which ones are loud, which ones are soft. Everything is determined by the score and the way that the conductor determines the score. So it's much more formal. Okay, so all these things are going to be a big part of the 1920s and what made it often called the Roaring Twenties. And in our next lecture, we're going to go into some detail about what made the 20s such a roaring time.